Hello again, Steve here with a few comments on something I've heard before, which goes along the lines of how it is that we can sort out what is more important and what is less important in terms of our imperatives or our precepts or our principles by which we live our lives, right? And the concept went something like this: moral or good is to evil as virtue is to vice. And I think that's an interesting concept to explore. So, for example, murder or theft, to me anyways, would fall into the moral evil slash paradigm, right? So we could say that it's always evil to murder somebody. It's not like it is sometimes and sometimes it isn't. Now somebody might say, oh well, so and so killed somebody. They got into a struggle and it was self-defense or whatever. Well, if it's a self-defense issue, then we're not going to call it murder, right? The other side of the coin then, the other paradigm, or the other area of our lives we might look at, is the virtue to vice spectrum. And while we could say something is virtuous or something is vice, we may not be saying that it's a moral issue per se, like a moral imperative per se, or an evil per se. So, for example, we might say that smoking is a vice, but it's not evil, right? And overeating certain types of fats or whatever constantly and making us more fat, it's not very virtuous. It's kind of a vice, right? It's kind of an addiction, or it's compensating or self-medicating for something or whatever. But we wouldn't say that it's evil. It's just something we got to work on. So, to me, it helps to see where the lines of sort of that cannot be crossed are, or the lines of principle, right? And I think these show up too. They get a little bit muddled, of course, because they get full of all kinds of religiosity. But we see these show up in old precepts and commandments and so on. Like, for example, the precepts of the Buddha that he had, or the Ten Commandments. We shall not kill, bear false witness, and steal, and whatever. And the same things show up in the precepts. No murdering, no stealing, no lying to people, no screwing around with people when you've agreed to somebody else, and keeping your promises, and so on. And these sorts of things are, and it's interesting how they're stated in the shall not category, because on a moral level, that's the only way they can be, right? We have to say to ourselves, there's things we can't do, but there's no requirement to do something, right? In other words, it's not evil. We can't describe it as evil as just sitting here, right? It could be vice, because we could get fatter and fatter all the time and lazy and so on, and not get involved in things that maybe we should get involved in for the betterment of ourselves or others. But by not doing something, like, in other words, it's never like a moral imperative to do something. Like, you could say, like, there's no such thing as moral imperative to duties. So duties are made up. Like, you're supposed to pay your taxes. You're supposed to fill out your census and all these sorts of things. Well, if you don't, nobody's going to say that's in the line of a moral evil, right? And, if you look at things like, we shall not murder somebody, we shall not steal from them and lie from them and stuff. Well, the opposite, what's the opposite of that? It's basically leaving people alone. So the opposite of that is leaving people alone, right? If there's somebody there and with the two people there, one of them is staring at the other and saying, I'm going to murder this guy. So the opposite is, I'm not going to murder that guy. So you can't make a commandment or a precept saying, I'm going to not murder that guy. It doesn't make any sense. So what makes more sense in the moral sphere of things is to restrict ourselves, to identify what lines we don't cross, and then everything else is freedom, basically. But I think it's good to, I know I kind of got off on a sidetrack there, and I was lost in my own ability, or my lack of ability to try to figure out what I was actually saying, but I hope that was somewhat understandable. But mainly what I wanted to talk about here was it's kind of a delineation between what we can establish as absolutes and what we can then recognize as virtuous as compared to vice. So we don't have to beat the hell out of ourselves because, we had a little extra cheesecake or something like that. While that may not be necessary, it's certainly not virtuous, perhaps. So it might be, to a certain extent, a vice. But it's not evil, right? Whereas killing ourselves or knowingly involving ourselves in elections that are for psychopaths who are going to steal from others for us is evil, right? So it's interesting to be able to, and if we're not aware of that, though, that's not evil. It's not even a vice, really. It might even be virtuous from the perspective that we're at when we realize what's going on, or overtly killing somebody, or overtly lying to people, stealing from people, and screwing around with people screwing with people, having sex with people, whatever, when we've agreed to somebody else that we're not going to do that, and so on. But that's all just lying, to call it what it is, right? So it really boils down to, not infringing upon other people, be that their physical body, their property, and the agreements we made with them. So if we basically live our lives based on that, and we're consistent with it, then more and more, even our vices, even that goes into the vice virtue area, because now one of those people we made agreements with is ourselves, right? So if we said to ourselves, for example, that I think that cheesecake is not the greatest thing for me because of my physical condition and I want to get in shape or whatever, just as a simple example, and then I find myself eating cheesecake, well, that is a violation of the agreement that I made with myself. And therefore that sort of goes into that you could say that then goes into the moral side of things, the moral versus evil. I mean, still not completely evil, because we still have modified our own agreement, essentially, is what it is. But when we're dealing with other people, and I guess a lot of this comes down to dealing with others versus dealing with ourselves. And the evils that we often see versus the morals have to do with our interactions with others. If we transgress upon others who haven't agreed to that transgression in any way, be it their person, their property, or the agreements we made with them, then, we're violating their non-agreement, right? Their non-agreement is being ignored. When it comes to ourselves, I think that's where more of the virtue and vice shows up, because we can make an agreement with ourselves, but we can also modify that agreement in the meantime. However, if we made an agreement with somebody else over there, without talking to them, we just modify it on our own, then it's not a modification of the agreement because they haven't been a party to that modification. So, that just came to me, actually. Maybe that is the delineation between the moral evil category and the virtue vice category has more to do with the former having to do with our relations with others, and the latter having to do with us. That's something to think about. And I think this helps with our quality of life too, because it helps to put things in perspective. Helps us to be more consistent in our lives and not be blown over by the tirades and emotional manipulation that others do to us or try to do to us, passive aggressiveness and so on, and also the mind games we play with ourselves. So if we have like a roadmap, right? If we have a roadmap and we're driving down a road and we got a squawking backseat driver who's constant, would represent our minds or the tantrums of others and so on going on in our world, and they're constantly telling us to turn here and turn there and turn here and turn there, and yet you can actually see the roadmap, then that tantrum doesn't matter. You can actually stop the car and say, "Get out, tantrum. I got the roadmap here. Thank you very much, and I'm going to keep going." So this helps us, I think, in our lives to set the course straighter. And the more we are self-directed in our lives, the more we're honest to ourselves then, and the better our real long-term quality of life is, I would say. Steve here again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.